Not only is it possible to lose fat and build muscle at the same time, but I tested it myself. And over the last few months, I lost 15 pounds while increasing strength in all of my lifts and seeing key measurements of key muscle groups actually grow the way that I wanted to. And in this video, I'm gonna walk you step by step through the exact process so that you can understand how to do a body recomposition where you're losing body fat and building muscle at the exact same time. So it really comes down to 3 steps. The first step is your nutrition, because we know that in order to lose body fat, you have to be in a calorie deficit. So the first thing that you want to pay attention to is the calories themselves. Now the question is, how do you create a calorie deficit? Well, first you have to establish what your maintenance calorie number is. Once you've done that, this is the amount of food that you can eat without your body weight going up or down, just to maintain where you're currently at. So once you've done that, now you can understand that, okay, in order to create a deficit from that number, I now need to subtract from my maintenance number in order to enter into a deficit. Now, you could subtract by different amounts if you wanted to make it more of a severe deficit, something like minus 500 or minus 1,000. You could also do something a bit more conservative, like minus 250 calories. And you're looking at this from a weekly perspective, because ultimately, if you sustain a 500 calorie deficit every single day, what's going to happen is your body is, on average, going to lose about 1 pound of fat per week at that pace. So if you do 250 calories, it's about half a pound that you'd be losing on average per week. Now, the key here is you don't want to be, for this particular purpose, for losing fat and building muscle, you don't want to be in too severe or too extreme of a calorie deficit, because you need those calories, you need that fuel in order to do the building muscle part, right? Because if you don't have any calories, you don't have any fuel, how are you going to expect your body to build lean muscle tissue? So the idea is that you want to take this maintenance calorie number, subtract, do it fairly conservatively, but put yourself into a calorie deficit so that you're actually reliably losing weight each week, but it's a very kind of small amount. And that's part of the restructuring, recomposition process. So once you've locked in what you're doing here with the calories, then you want to slide over to your macronutrients. And so this is going to be super important, because your calories determine your body weight, but your macronutrients can determine your body shape. So there's really 3 nutrients that you want to pay attention to. There's only 3 macronutrients in general: proteins, fats, and carbohydrates. So what should you do with the proteins? Well, we can list it up here, because we know for proteins, protein is going to be between 0.7 and 1 gram per pound of body weight. So that's kind of what you want to shoot for with the proteins. When it comes to the fats, dietary fats, you want to be in this 0.3 to 0.5 grams per pound of body weight. And for carbs, the most important thing here is the timing. Okay, so basically the carbs are going to fill up the gaps. You have your calories on top, and then you prioritize your proteins first, make sure you get your fats, and then the carbohydrates essentially just fill in the rest of the gaps there. So you could do some things where you flex your fats and carbohydrates if you wanted to, just to make it a little bit easier and more streamlined, so that way you could just think about, okay, calories, proteins, those are my main things. Everything else is just going to fall into the calories window. And I do that with some of my more busy clients. But if you wanted to optimize this and really give yourself the best shot at losing fat and building muscle at the same time, you do want to be hitting these within reason, as according to these ranges here. So for the protein, 0.7 to 1 is going to be enough to not only maintain the current muscle that you have, but also to be able to build muscle through muscle protein synthesis. So that's kind of the threshold to shoot for. For your dietary fats, I used to think that if I eat a bunch of fats, I'm going to get fat. And it sounds simple. It sounds kind of stupid, but that's what I thought. The thing is, for dietary fats, they're actually so helpful at regulating your hormones. And so without eating enough of these fats, your hormones are going to be against you. Things that actually regulate your appetite, for example, like leptin, ghrelin, your testosterone, your estrogen, all these different hormones that work together, they're all regulated by healthy dietary fats, almond butters, avocados, for example. So this is not something that you want to neglect. The idea is to try and get in that 0.3 to 0.5 grams of fat per pound of body weight range so that you can check this box here. So this is kind of the idea. And then we talk about timing. That's going to be super key, because your carbohydrates are fuel. So even if you were taking a like keto diet, for example, right? You don't eat a lot of carbohydrates on that kind of diet. Well, the thing is, your body actually ends up converting some of these other macronutrients, a little bit less efficient, but the proteins and the fats into carbs so that your body can use that as glycogen for your workouts, for your cognition, for your thinking. And so all this comes back to the fact that your brain kind of needs carbs. Like that's its main source of fuel, your brain and your body. So ideally, you want these carbohydrates to be stacked around your training window if you're going to give yourself the best shot at building muscle through a training program. So what that looks like is, 50, 100, 150 carbohydrates before your workout, say 60 to 90 minutes before, and then the same sort of thing after your workout. So we know that the anabolic window myth is actually, it's a myth. So after you finish a workout, you don't necessarily need to go sit down and eat a horse meal. It's just the science doesn't support that. It's more about the average of the day, the average of the week. However, there's a good reason to have a lot of carbohydrates, at least a good percentage of your daily carbohydrate intake right after you finish a lift to restore those glycogen stores inside of your body, inside of your muscles. So that's the timing. You basically want to sandwich the carbohydrates around your workout window. So if you do all these things from a nutrition standpoint, that's going to put you in great position to lose fat and give yourself at least the best opportunity to build muscle. But ultimately, when you talk about building muscle, it comes down to the training. It comes down to the stimulus that you're actually trying to force the muscle to grow, right? So when you go into training, there's really two principles that you need to pay attention to if you're going to be growing some muscle. And the first is your progression. So this is something called progressive overload. And what this means is that you're seeing measurable improvements, measurable progress each week, or at least each week in general, right? So there could be a week that's down, up, but generally, it's trending in the direction of progress. Maybe not every week's going to be perfect, but that's kind of what you're looking for. And what that means is you're making progress within the same conditions. So it's not as if, 1 week you do 2 sets of bench press and then the next week you come and do 3 sets of bench press. You've now manipulated the total volume. You've changed the game a little bit. You've changed the conditions. What you'd want to see is improvements within those 2 sets, same conditions, right? Not adding a third set in, okay? So that's sort of the idea with the progression here. One of the best ways to do this is to have a good training split that allows for sufficient recovery so that you can actually get better each week and that you can actually make that progress, whether it looks like improving your form, using more weights, or actually using more reps under the same amount of weight. So those are some of the things that you'd want to look for, especially in terms of rep range. We know that the most modern science suggests that you can really grow muscle from anywhere from like 2 to 30 reps. So it all comes down to essentially this point number 2 here, which is the tension. Right? You want to create mechanical tension. This is the intensity. This is the perceived effort to your sets. So whether you do a set of 3 or whether you do a set of 30, it all comes down to those last couple of reps where your muscles are involuntarily slowing down. So they can't really lift the weight at the same speed as they could at the beginning of the set when you were fresh, because now you're approaching something called failure, where you can't do another repetition with good form of that particular set. So that's kind of the idea here of the mechanical tension portion, is making sure that you are training with enough intensity to promote muscle growth. Now, in my opinion, what I would do in terms of rep range is stay within like the 4 to 10 range. 10 maybe if you're kind of towards the beginner or intermediate side and you want some more like practice reps. But the more efficient that you can be with a movement, the closer I would slide that to like 4 total reps, 4 or 5 reps in a set. Because now you're mitigating some of the fatigue that could potentially accumulate if you do a 30 rep set, right? If you do 30 reps and the only ones that really count towards muscle growth are the last, 3 or 4, that's about 25 reps of just kind of junk reps that didn't really do anything to help further the muscle growth process. So if you can kind of cut that down and make it more efficient and just focus on the actual reps that are going to move the needle, that's the idea. That's what you would want to happen. Now, a little bit easier said than done. You obviously want to be good at the exercise and feel proficient in the way that you're executing it, but that would be sort of the theory that you want to aim for in a lot of these exercises. So when it comes to your training, those are the 2 things. You need to be able to see progression under the same circumstances, right? That's the progressive overload factor. And you need to be training with enough effort, with enough intensity to create mechanical tension, which is what actually drives the muscle growth itself. It stimulates all of the motor units and it actually allows you to build the muscle. You need that intensity. So again, whether it's 30 reps or 3, it doesn't matter, but you've got to be pushing basically up to failure. For most people, I would tell them, go all the way to failure. Once you become a little bit more advanced in your lifting, you may want to kind of dial it back and be like 1 or 2 reps shy of failure, but you can't do that if you've never been to failure before. You don't have a reference point. So if I told you, hey, you're going to go almost to failure, but you're going to have 2 reps in the bank, you might look at me and say, well, I don't even know what failure is. So how am I going to do 2 reps in the bank if I have never really been to failure before? So a lot of people think they're at failure, but you really, really got to push, and you'd be surprised how far you can push yourself if you're locked in the right headspace and you're treating your recovery correctly and you're actually making that progress. You can push pretty hard. So that's the idea here for the training. Those are the first 2. And then the third here is your metabolism. And by the way, if you would like someone to build all of this out for you so that you don't have to guess what you should be doing in the gym, what you should be doing in the kitchen, what foods to eat, and you actually want to learn skills that are lifelong skills that put your fitness on autopilot, how to build meals, how to program a workout, I'm going to put some information in the description below, and you can apply for my one-to-one coaching program where I'm personally showing you step by step exactly how to do this. I not only give you the results that you're looking for, and I guarantee it, but I also teach you how to do it so that you can do this for the rest of your life. So anyways, if you have any interest in checking out any of those resources, I'm going to put them down in the description below. And the reason why this is so important is because when it comes to your metabolism, you're basically thinking about your runway for takeoff. This is kind of an analogy that I think makes sense and is kind of simple to understand this. If you're a pilot for an airplane, you have a really short runway in order to take off. You really got to be perfect. There's not a lot of room for error. But if you have a much longer runway, you've got a little bit of room, like a little bit more wiggle room, for example, like a little more leash to it. So now I'm combining analogies, but you get the idea. There's more room, kind of buffer space, that you could potentially, make a mistake, whatever, and still be fine, still be able to take off. That's the idea with having a boosted metabolism and going through something called a metabolic priming phase. Because say, a client comes to me and they're eating about 1,800 calories. And let's say it's a man, they're about 32 years old, pretty good functioning metabolism besides the fact that they're eating 1,800 calories, go to the gym a little bit, do some steps, fairly active, whatever. What I'd want to do first with this person before going into a calorie deficit, because remember, if we do the calorie deficit we talked about earlier, you'd take the maintenance number, which right now for this person is probably around 1,800. You'd have to subtract 250 or 500. All of a sudden, you're in the 1,600 range of that's how much food you're eating, and you just started. So if you hit a plateau at 1,600 calories, that's tough because you either have to double down and go into a deeper calorie deficit. You could do some things like a refeed or something like that, but that's a tough position. I'd rather avoid that and instead take some time to repair this metabolism and get him back up to a more robust maintenance calorie number. So what that would look like is slowly introducing food, slowly introducing calories back in at a consistent pace to get that maintenance number a little bit higher. So instead of it being 1,800, it would be something closer to 2,500, 2,800, 3,000. And so this is exactly what I did when I did a body recomposition, where originally the leanest I had been was about 160 pounds and I was eating 1,700 calories. And now fast forward, after I did this metabolic priming phase and actually went into a body recomposition and followed these steps I'm explaining to you here, I got back down to 162 pounds. So about 2 pounds heavier than where I was at the leanest. But the difference was I was eating 2,400 calories. The difference between 2,400 calories and like 1,750 on the calories is massive. I mean, that's like another huge meal that you could sit down and have. So for me, that was much more sustainable and allows me to stay fairly lean pretty much year round because I spent the time investing in trying to fix this and doing a metabolic priming phase and actually introducing more food so that my body could handle that. So that's kind of the essence of the metabolic priming. And one of the things that you do at the exact same time is adjust your total daily energy expenditure. And so what that looks like is this little pyramid here, but basically there are some factors, right? These are the things that basically cause you to burn calories throughout the day. And so for a lot of people, they think, well, I just go to the gym and I exercise and, that's where I burn most of my calories. But if you think about it, that's just this small slice here at the top. That's only your intentional exercise is about 5% of the total calories that you burn each day. So if you really want your metabolism to increase, you want to focus on kind of these big rocks here, these big fish at the bottom. So your BMR is your basal metabolic rate. So basically what that's talking about is how many calories that your body has to burn in order to just keep you alive and functioning. And one of the best ways to increase that is by having more muscle mass on your body. So by following some of the stuff we talked about here on the training point, you're able to actually grow some more muscle. You don't need to be, Arnold Schwarzenegger or super jacked or anything like that. But if you just have more muscle mass on your body, you're going to be burning more calories in general throughout the day, just living and breathing and doing your normal stuff. Then you have your thermic effect of food, which basically comes down to the amount of calories that your body digests, that your body burns when you're digesting foods. And so it's different for proteins, for fats, for carbohydrates. For proteins, obviously, your body's going to be burning a little bit more calories to digest those proteins, closer to 30%, where the fats and the carbs are more like 5 to 10%, kind of in that range. So the more proteins you eat, the more calories that you're burning. So you can kind of take that into account as well to continue to try and boost your metabolism. And then your NEAT is your non-exercise activity thermogenesis. And so basically what this is like right now, I'm moving my arms, right? Or if I'm walking around, taking steps, it's not intentional exercise, but it's just kind of the byproduct of doing these sort of subtle movements throughout the day. And your body burns 10 to 15% of its total calories per day with this spot right here, with your NEAT. So these are the sorts of things that you want to take into account in going into a process where you're trying to boost your metabolism. And again, the reason why you'd want to do that is because then you start from a more favorable starting point. Your maintenance calorie number has increased, and now when you go into a deficit, you're still at a 250 or a 500 deficit like we talked about before, but instead of that deficit looking like 1,700 calories, now it's closer to 2,500, 2,250, something that's more sustainable, it's more reasonable. Gives you more runway as well, because if you get stuck, say you hit a plateau and you have to double down and go into an additional, a little bit steeper deficit, now you're doing so from a position of 2,500 calories as your starting point, as opposed to having to be at like 1,600 calories and then making the tough decision of, do I reverse out or do I double down and just sacrifice my quality of life, my hormones, everything? I'd rather just avoid that position altogether and do some due diligence on the back end and actually just boost my metabolism up a little bit and get that maintenance number a bit higher. So in essence, these are the three things that I would suggest doing, and this is kind of how I help coach my clients through this process. And we always start with phase one, which is boosting your metabolism. So regardless of if you're trying to do a body recomposition, if you're trying to do weight gain, like a muscle gain, sort of lean bulk type of approach, or if you're trying to lose body fat, all of those I consider more push phases. That's kind of phase two. That's where you're trying to tell your body to make some sort of change. But phase one should be boosting your metabolism and really putting in some effort to try and do this metabolic priming phase. And so that's what I always do with my clients, and then set them up for success with whatever else their goal looks like in phase two. Phase three would be to pull it back out and be able to maintain that for a sustainable pace for essentially the rest of their life, and have the tools to be basically putting fitness on autopilot. So anyways, thank you for checking out this video. I appreciate it. Please hit the subscribe button if you liked this style, where I'm kind of just up here, on the whiteboard, kind of a one take sort of style. If that felt like something that was valuable to you and that you kind of enjoyed this, please leave a like so I can see like, oh, okay, people actually like this kind of video. So if you can go ahead and do that, I would appreciate it. Subscribe for more content like this, and I'll catch you in the next one.